Well, I've finally seen Tenet, and talk about a narcissistically confusing movie that still managed to be a fucking good time. In fact, I don't think there's ever been a movie so complex and up its own ass so much that still was able to win me over and make me enjoy the hell out of my viewing experience as much as Tenet did. Christopher Nolan is one sly director, and I personally feel like I should be frustrated with this movie, with its relentlessly convoluted plot, and yet I left feeling like the silly one here because Christopher Nolan essentially won me over yet again and took me on such an enjoyable thrill ride, despite me feeling a little dumb walking out of this movie. So let's talk about what I mean and how I even begin to process a film like Tenet, but not to worry because this is a non-spoiler review. It's very interesting describing the overall plot of the movie because on one hand, it's incredibly complex to a fault and requires, in my opinion, multiple viewing experiences to fully comprehend the creativity and intricacies presented by Nolan in ways we've never seen before. But on the other hand, many plot elements can easily be described as straight-laced and rather conventional for a Nolan film. For example, our main hero, played by John David Washington, is basically a type of American spy on a mission to stop the evil Russian guy, played by Kenneth Branagh. The villain is also married to our damsel in distress character, played by Elizabeth Debicki, that our hero later feels compelled to save from our mustache-twirling villain. And then there's the helpful sidekick to our hero, played by Robert Pattison. Those are very broad strokes that best describe our four main leads. You have the hero, the villain, the damsel in distress, and the sidekick to the hero. It's pretty cut and dry, but it's surrounded by a multi-layered narrative involving the manipulation of time itself. Now, I've heard people express qualms with how conventional a number of these story elements are, and it really is for a Nolan film to a certain degree, and I understand those arguments, but given that the overarching plot that twists these narratives together is so fresh, like something we've never seen before, I found myself perfectly content with more simpler story arcs for a few of our characters to balance things out in a sense. Now, like I said, this movie was fun. It's a whopping 2.5 hours long, a little short for a Nolan film. They usually kind of hinge on 3 hours, but 2.5 hours nonetheless is how long Tenet is. And even though several Nolan films take about the first 30 minutes to set up all the chess pieces, I am happy to report that Tenet really takes off right from the start, and it just keeps speeding down this road, and it was honestly quite a thrill ride for me. If there's one thing that Nolan continues to hit out of the park with every film he creates, it's his exceptional use of practical effects and high-intensity action scenes, and he tends to keep the grand finale spectacle under wraps for all of his films until you see them. And Tenet is no different. Despite its incredibly aggressive marketing campaign for several months during this pandemic, there is so much in this movie not given away in the trailers. And I will say that of all films that boast to be an IMAX theatrical experience, Tenet is 100% made to be experienced on the biggest screen possible if you are safely able to. But obviously, living in a time like we do now during a pandemic, it's definitely not my place to tell you to go to a theater to see this. You are in charge of making that decision for yourself if there are theaters open near you. I'm simply stating that even though I'm sure Tenet will be incredibly enjoyable to many who choose to eventually wait to watch it at home, it's painfully obvious after seeing this movie on an IMAX screen myself that Nolan shot this movie in such a grand cinematic way that was initially intended to be a big screen spectacle type experience. And it's unfortunate that it opened at a time where the world simply isn't in a place to fully enjoy that type of theater experience like it used to. Now, this movie presents a lot of twists and surprises, like all great Nolan films, and I won't give away any of them. But there are plenty of surprises and many moments where I gasped as many puzzle pieces started to fit together. And it was fun because once the movie reached a certain point in revealing more of the story in such a aha moment, it was fun to also predict how other pieces might fall into place as the story moves along. It's like a good mystery that references things we've already seen but didn't think to care about, and how it's the little things that we might miss along the way that actually make the biggest impact in the long run. So in that sense, the movie does rely on you to pay close attention to everything. As for the time manipulation elements where you see visuals or objects of people moving backwards in time, as presented in the trailers, the visuals alone in presenting such a mind-boggling phenomenon never failed to entertain and intrigue the hell out of me. And there is a lot of time manipulation in this movie that I won't give away, but it never got old, and I was mesmerized by seeing it play out. And so much of it was accomplished using practical effects in such a way that I do believe Nolan outdid himself in this area of creativity and story creation, visually speaking. The visuals in showcasing this were that good. Now, as for the characters, my two favorites were Elizabeth Debicki, who plays the leading lady and wife to the film's villain, and then John David Washington, who is only referred to as the protagonist. Now, John David Washington was very engaging on screen, and I argue that Elizabeth Debicki was probably the beating heart that held this movie together, and in particular, I liked their dynamic together on screen. Sure, the development is simple, and no one is turning out Oscar-winning performances, but they still gave their all, and I was rooting for their characters the entire time. Kenneth Branagh did an amazing job at being a fucking asshole, especially in how his character treated his character's wife, played by Elizabeth Debicki. I just hated him. There were times he almost took his character too over the top, but luckily I felt he struck a perfect balance of sinister, serious, and unhinged. He chewed up the scenery, and I totally bought him as a formidable villain. As for Robert Pattison, I will say he left the least amount of an impact on me between our four leads, which was surprising. I was expecting a little bit more charisma from him purely based off the trailers alone, but I felt they kept his character pretty straight-laced. He did play off of John David Washington well, and I did like his character, but I also feel they didn't really give him much to make him really stand out as an MVP in any way. I guess I wish they would have spiced up his role just a bit more than they did in the end. Now let's discuss what I meant by my opening comment on how this film is narcissistically confusing. And the reason I say that is because this film is so heavily layered, which is fine to begin with, but I also feel like the characters' dialogue is written in a way that feels cryptic, as if they themselves don't want to give away too much of the plot, even how they talk to each other. It's almost like Christopher Nolan wrote such a complex story with so many strings that make perfect sense to him, but he failed to edit the story down in a way that's more accessible to someone not in his head. To him, meaning Christopher Nolan, he knows everything. Therefore, of course, he could still see this all making sense because he created it from head to toe. But for us, we know nothing. Therefore, it's necessary to give us, as an audience, something more to chew on and access a bit more easily. Hence, why I say this film found itself too far up its own ass sometimes. But I will say that after finishing the movie, I do believe Christopher Nolan left all the pieces we need to make sense of the majority of the movie. but it'll just require more than one viewing to comprehend it all. And that could really annoy some people, and I get it. And that was ultimately the film's greatest misstep. It was too complex for its own good and makes the audience work a bit harder than we probably should have to. But if you enjoyed the film, like me, you will probably be excited to revisit the film and fit more puzzle pieces together. Now, the last misstep of the film is the character development, which I feel took a back seat to the visual spectacle and complex narrative layers of the film. Nolan is usually great at fleshing out our leading characters, and I do think most of our leads show some depth to their roles and are given some pretty good moments to shine, but it's not at the level we get from movies like Inception or Interstellar, where the character development is equal to that of the visual spectacle. Sadly, John David Washington isn't given nearly as much meat to chew on, unlike other Nolan leading men like Leonardo DiCaprio or Matthew McConaughey, as I would have liked. But still, the characters played their parts well and were able to give me just enough to make me care enough for them, especially Elizabeth Debicki for me personally. At the end of the day, I do consider Tenet to be an overall success. Sure, Nolan had a few hiccups with character development and an overly complicated plot that could have used more editing, but he still presented a visually thrilling espionage, spy-type movie with excellent pacing, incredible effects, many fun surprises, and ingenious storytelling elements in dealing with the manipulation of time that I've never seen before and always blew my mind the more I witnessed it. It may not be his best film, but it's still a solid film nonetheless, and a tremendous spectacle to witness on the big screen if you safely can. And I personally can't wait to watch it again and again and put more of those puzzle pieces together, because I do believe the end product overall is an accomplishment. I'm going to give Tenet an A-. And that's my review for you, so I'd be curious if you've had a chance to even see this movie. Feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions down below, but try not to go into any spoilers for the sake of spoilers, because there's a lot to spoil. And as always, thank you all again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Ryan Bamey, signing off. Bye, everyone.